Picture this, okay? You're looking at a battlefield. On one side, you've got this massive, terrifying demon, just armed to the teeth with the absolute most cutting-edge weapons you could imagine. And on the other side, a literal newborn baby. I know, right? It sounds totally ridiculous, but believe it or not, this is the exact, super vivid David versus Goliath metaphor that a prominent speaker used to describe the 9-year Afghan-Soviet war. In this explainer, we're going to be diving into how really extreme imagery like this, along with some powerful historical narratives, are woven together to frame a very specific political argument. We're going to see firsthand how a speaker takes these huge, incredibly complex historical events and just distills them down into one single, highly emotional narrative. Why? To mobilize an audience. So today, we're unpacking a highly charged sermon by Allama Delwar Hossein Saidi. And just to be totally clear, we're not here to debate the actual history today. Nope. We're just here to see exactly how he uses it. Like, how does a speaker blend history, humor, and outright outrage to get a crowd fired up? We're going to map out the whole blueprint of how he constructs his argument for political and religious mobilization. Okay, let's dive straight into this. First, we'll look at the thesis of unity, then the Afghan-Soviet asymmetry, the cost of division, some examples from Iran and Pakistan, and finally contextualizing Bangladesh. Section 1. The thesis of unity, a historical claim. So, to really understand the foundation of the speaker's argument, we've got to look at the unshakable pillar that his whole entire speech is built on. Right out of the gate, he lays down this super clear central premise. The historical success of Islamic movements hinges entirely on one single factor, just one, and that is the unity of religious scholars, or the ulama. He paints with a massive brush here, telling his audience that history itself is the witness. He traces it all the way from the early movements resisting British colonial rule, straight through to the political elections of October 2001. His formula is beautifully simple, honestly. Where scholars have united, victory has inevitably followed. And, it's a brilliant piece of rhetorical framing. It takes these unbelievably messy, complex historical outcomes and basically reduces them to a single controllable variable. Just unity. Moving to Section 2, the Afghan-Soviet asymmetry, evidence of unity. Now, to back up this thesis, the speaker doesn't just stick to abstract ideas. No, he brings in his first major historical case study, the 9-year Afghan-Soviet War. And this brilliantly illustrates his real talent for rhetorical exaggeration. To emphasize what he frames as the miraculous nature of the Afghan victory, he leans super heavily into the vast asymmetry of the conflict. Remember that terrifying Soviet demon we talked about earlier? He contrasts that heavily armed force with the Afghan mujahideen. But he claims the mujahideen were fighting with what he calls Noah's-era wet rifles. Basically, ancient, waterlogged donkey guns. By maximizing the sheer impossibility of those odds, he sets the perfect stage to claim that their ultimate victory wasn't due to military strategy or foreign backing. No way. It was divine intervention, triggered by something else entirely. Okay, so what actually triggered that victory then? Well, the speaker uses this surprisingly folksy, actually kind of funny anecdote to explain it. He tells this story about the war breaking out and everyone panicking and fleeing into the jungles and mountains. He jokes that it was like one person running to their uncle's house, another going to their grandfather's, another heading to their father-in-law's, only to realize that they had all accidentally run to the exact same spot in the jungle. So suddenly these deeply divided scholars, Sunnis, Baghdadis, folks who normally just despised each other, were forced face to face. And what did they do? They started hugging. According to this sermon, this completely accidental, forced unity in the jungle is the sole reason that the quote-unquote Soviet ghost couldn't ride on their shoulders. It's honestly a masterclass in using relatable storytelling to cement a very heavy ideological point. Unity secured the divine victory. Section 3. The cost of division, losing the advantage. But hey, every rhetorical thesis needs its inverse, right? If unity brings divine victory, what exactly happens when it breaks down? Well, to make his point about internal division, the speaker details some incredibly specific and, frankly, extreme examples of sectarian infighting. He talks about rival factions refusing to even return each other's greetings. Or, get this, they'd literally cover their faces with handkerchiefs just to avoid having to look at one another. He mocks the extreme fatwas being issued, where scholars were out there declaring each other infidels for 3, 5, or even 17 different reasons. He even brings up this completely absurd sectarian ruling where a cow, yes, an actual cow, was supposedly declared an infidel just because it ate grass from a rival heretic's grave. It sounds crazy, but by highlighting these bizarre extremes, he's showing his audience the absolute absurdity and the very real danger of sectarian disunity. From there, he maps out this very direct cause and effect argument based entirely on that disunity. So, step 1, the scholars become divided, they get suspicious, and they completely stop talking to each other. Step 2, because of all this bitter infighting, they lose their divine strength and their luck basically just burns out. And then, step 3, this internal weakness paves the exact path for George W. Bush and American forces to roll right in and take over Afghanistan. So, if you follow his narrative, foreign invasion isn't just a matter of geopolitics or military strategy. Actually, scratch that, it's not about that at all for him. It is the direct, divine punishment for the internal bickering of religious scholars. Section 4. Iran and Pakistan examples, expanding the thesis. Now, the speaker wants to prove that this isn't just some isolated Afghan phenomenon, right? So he zooms out to some international case studies to validate his unity thesis on a more global scale. First up, he looks at Iran. Now, he acknowledges right away, he doesn't hide it, that there are some pretty significant theological differences in Aqidah, between his Sunni audience and the Shia Muslims of Iran. But he tells his listeners, hey, these Iranian scholars, the Ayatollahs, they temporarily set those differences aside, and because they managed to unify, they were able to humble a massive superpower and establish an Islamic state. The big takeaway he's extracting for his audience here is that political unity has to temporarily supersede theological purity if you ever want to defeat a greater enemy. Now, what's really interesting about this next bit is how he uses a very specific historical quote to project absolute strength. He's recounting the American threat to withhold food aid from Iran over those 56 embassy hostages, and he neutrally presents Ayatollah Khomeini's famous retort to the U.S. president. The quote goes, "Who are you threatening with food? A nation for whom fasting 1 month a year is mandatory does not wait for your food." Wow. By dropping this quote into his sermon, the speaker is showing his audience the exact kind of fearless, totally uncompromising defiance that he claims is only possible when a religious community is completely unified. After that, he quickly points over to Pakistan as another proof of concept. He references the Muttahida Majlis-e-Amal, or the MMA, which was this big political coalition that managed to bring together all sorts of different sects and schools of thought. By forming a united front, these incredibly diverse Islamic scholars shocked the world and grabbed massive political power. So again, he's just hammering home that same formula. Set aside your minor differences, form a strong coalition, and political victory is virtually guaranteed. Section 5. Contextualizing Bangladesh, the ultimate conflict. So having just taken his audience on this grand global tour of his thesis, the speaker brings it all back home. He applies this historical argument directly to his local modern-day context regarding the past government in Bangladesh. And to really cement his point about the severe hostility they're facing, he deploys an incredibly shocking piece of rhetoric. He brings up a secular poet who allegedly compared the sacred Fajr Azan, the morning call to prayer, to a quote-unquote prostitute calling a customer. Just let that sink in. By invoking a comparison that deeply offensive, the speaker is deliberately, surgically sparking intense emotional outrage in his audience. He's using this specific quote as the ultimate proof that the previous government and its secular allies weren't just standard political opponents. No, they were existential, mortal enemies of the faith itself. It serves as his final, most urgent call for his followers to unite against what he portrays as the ultimate evil. And that brings us to the absolutely crucial takeaway of this explainer. What we've been looking at today isn't just a simple recounting of history. It's the strategic, deliberate weaponization of history. By taking these humorous anecdotes from Afghanistan, weaving in quotes from Iranian Ayatollahs, and capping it off with intensely provocative claims about local poets, the speaker constructs this airtight narrative where unity is literally the only path to survival. So it really leaves us with a critical question to ponder, right? How do modern political movements leverage these historical narratives of religious unity and division to mobilize their followers today? The very next time you find yourself listening to a political or religious speech, I want you to ask yourself, what story are they telling about the past, and what exactly are they trying to make me do in the present? Thank you so much for joining us on this explainer, and keep asking those tough questions.